Alright, I am Hunter and this is my Deliverable 3 presentation. So the two main assumptions that Carr makes I have listed here. The first one, in my opinion, is that IT alone does not help the company financially. He likes to make a lot of comparisons to the railroads in the 1800s America and the fact that companies were racing to make as many railroads as they could and it ends up oversaturating and they get underutilized, which ends up costing the companies money. And I believe this is an unfair comparison with IT because IT offers more than data transportation, obviously. It provides more efficiency in business environments, more data security beyond just physical limitations, and it also has more accurate data on the company's operations due to the an immense amount of information that a company has. I believe IT can help provide easier methods of obtaining that, collecting it, and processing it. The second assumption I think that he makes is that IT investments are short-lived because all infrastructure is the same. I believe this is also false because there are many case-specific IT utilizations in companies, depending on what the company or industry they're working in or using. And I believe newer technologies in IT address these case-specific utilizations. So I think that is a clear reason as to why IT infrastructure is not all the same for every company. All right, so for his first recommendation of spending less on IT, there I think are three obvious pros to this one. The first one is that this opens up the company-wide budget. If you're spending less on IT, that means you have more money to spend elsewhere. This also ensures that necessary infrastructure is being used only. With a smaller budget, you don't have as much extra money to spend on maybe things that aren't quite as necessary to operate the infrastructure, something that may be nice but not required. Thirdly, this gives attackers less options for vulnerabilities. I think this kind of is a common sense one as well. If you have less money to spend on equipment, that means you're going to have less equipment, things like endpoints, for example, and this just gives attackers less options in total to find an exploit or a vulnerability to breach the system and hack in. There are three cons though with spending less on IT. The first one is that not all necessary infrastructure may be available. And this kind of is like a double-edged sword because this is also on the pro side, but because you have such a small budget, that might mean that you have to cut out on what is necessary. And this is kind of a question that ends up going down later on that I will explain. But the second con is that newer technologies won't be available for use, obviously. You're not going to have as much money, and newer technologies are usually costly for implementation and deployment, so you're not going to be able to use those as often. And thirdly, you might have a lack of equipment, and this may impede employee work efficiency. With a smaller budget for the IT infrastructure, there may not be as much machinery for the employees to work on things like workstations, printers, etc. And this could lower the work efficiency. So the missing logic or facts for this recommendation are one that you have to consider: is the current infrastructure able to maintain the day-to-day business operation? That is, the company that is deciding whether or not to spend less on IT, is their current infrastructure able to support what they can do right now? If that's the case, I believe that spending less on IT could be beneficial. And the second thing you have to ask is how much IT infrastructure is used in the business. And this is where I was getting at with the necessary infrastructure thing in the con side. Bigger businesses will have more infrastructure. So, with a smaller budget, you might not be able to get all the necessary items available for use into that. So that's just one thing you have to consider when you decide whether or not to spend less on IT. My second one, or the second recommendation rather, is follow and don't lead. The three pros that I found with this one are that one, future success strategies are easier to determine because if you're following a company, they know what is successful and what isn't, so your roadmap is much more laid out for you. The second pro is that proper solutions to problems may already be known. Again, the companies that were on the forefront of this strategy that you're following they would have already run into these problems, and they likely already, if they're still going, have the solutions for those problems. So you will also have solutions for those problems. And three, if the companies that you tend to follow are quote unquote up to standard, then you will be too. It's as simple as that. There are three cons to following rather than leading. The first one is that there are unknown solutions that you may run into, and they will likely remain unknown. If no companies before you that you're leading were able to find a solution to a certain problem to the strategy, you probably won't find it either. Second one is that you have no standout advantage. You have no wow factor, no uniqueness, because you're following the same strategies as another company is. You're following right in line with them. You're basically just a sheep in the crowd of sheep. You know, you're not going to be any different from the people who you are following. And the third con is that you have a risk of being surpassed by a company following their unique strategies in terms of success, because they aren't following, something that's already been established. They might have something unique or a different solution they might go into with a problem, and it might end up being largely successful and much better than the strategy that you were following along. And I think the one question you have to ask when following this piece of advice is, are there leaders in your market that are already well established? Because if there are, I believe that following is likely the better scenario, because if there are leaders that are established in your market and have been around for a long time, then it's going to be really hard to knock them out, as they are one of the big dogs already. They're one of the companies that, for whatever industry it is, everyone looks to. For example, Microsoft and computers. It's really hard to knock them off of where they are. Everyone relies on Windows for their PCs. That's just a quick example of that, though. For focusing on risks and not opportunities advice, I found that some of the pros were that, one, there is less overall risk management, and this kind of sounds counterintuitive, but let me explain. When you're not following opportunities, you are not going to have as many newer technologies to implement. And with new technologies come new risk factors. If you're not implementing newer technologies from these opportunities, and you're, behind the curve, I guess, so to speak, on technologies, you overall have less risk factors to worry about. The second pro is that you are more likely to, quote unquote, remain afloat by not chasing opportunities that could potentially fail. You will, in turn, have a higher chance of not failing. Simple as that. The third pro is that you're behind with the more leading companies, I guess you could say, at a much smaller rate compared to what a failed opportunity would do to you. A failed opportunity could provide a multitude of risks, and those risks could really make you, fall out of the market competition compared to mitigating your risks instead. So the cons to this piece of advice are that, one, you can miss out on major successful opportunities that happen. You won't know about them because you are not taking the opportunities. The second con is that you're generally going to be behind the curve for new advances. Focusing on risk means that you don't want to implement newer things as often. Understandable, it's part of the advice, but you're not going to be up to par with the new advances that are coming out and the new technologies. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the third con, is that you're not going to be a leading edge company. You have to realize that when you're focusing on risks and not opportunities, that you're not going to be one of the top. So the one thing that I want to talk about this, I wrote that not all technologies provide the same advantages, but let me explain this. Carr, in the article that he wrote, tried to convey this message that new resources that enter the competition, they become mandatory, and they provide more risk factors along with that. They become mandatory, but they're inconsequential in their strategy. So you're getting more risks out of it than you are advantages. But the counter argument to that is not all newer technologies provide the same advantages. Some can provide leaps and bounds advantages ahead of what other technologies may do. So you have to consider this when you want to focus on risks instead of opportunities. So my IT strategy that I was going to implement at IVK is very simple. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up quarterly strategic planning meetings. And at these meetings, I'm going to make sure that all of the right people are there. People such as the IT department leaders, the business unit leaders. These two will give me insights on both the business aspect and the IT technical aspect. The industry and financial analysts will help make sure that we're staying aligned with not only industry standards, but to make sure that financially we can set up things that will be sustainable by the company. IT architects and IT practitioners, or the people that are working in the IT department, I believe are also good for the meeting because they will provide a bottom-up sort of voice, and that'll let us know what's happening on the bottom side and give us some insight on, maybe some recommendations that could happen from the lower end of the spectrum, I guess you could say. The model that I'm going to follow will be the run, grow, and transform model. This is the order of operations of importance for the company. The first concept of run is to make sure that the current business operations are maintainable and are running and are good. Beyond that, we have the grow concept, and the grow concept will be focused and emphasize on scalability of the current business operations we have and future expandability that we can do with that. And finally, the transform concept. This concept is something that we will hit last, but is the third most important part of the model, and it's to focus on new business capabilities from emerging technologies. We need to constantly be up to date on current trends and current new technologies that are emerging that may give us advantages for the company. The IT principles that I want to follow as well, that I think will provide a multitude of benefits to IVK. One is the utilization of cloud technology. I think that'll be very important. And I think outsourcing when necessary will help lower our resource use of our IT department on the company with menial tasks, and we can focus more on things that will help drive us to be a more successful business. So the first technology I'm going to implement is a firewall as a service. Simply enough, it's just a vendor lease cloud firewall service. The advantages to using firewall as a service, cloud technology, one is that it's much cheaper. It's cheaper in the sense that, one, you don't have to purchase and deploy and implement hardware on site. That all costs money in terms of, the amount of labor that it takes to put in, and the equipment costs money to purchase. The other advantage to firewall as a service is that you have more up-to-date equipment and security details. Typically, when you purchase a firewall, you're going to have it for several years, and that costs a lot of money. But with vendors doing firewall as a service, they tend to, because they're doing it as a service, you get it cheaper, and they, because that is their whole mission objective, is to lease out firewalls, are constantly updating, switching out their machines, and making sure that they are up to date, and that newer security details that come with these machines are also in there. So you'll have advantages with that as well, because traditionally if you have your own firewall, you're going to be stuck with it for several years, and whatever is on it is on it. Any patches, software that comes out that you're lucky to get, you'll have. But these people make sure that they're up to date and they're good to go constantly. Second technology are hybrid storage arrays. These are arrays that are built with a combination of traditional hard drive disks and solid state drives. The goal of hybrid storage arrays are to mitigate the price performance gap between platter-based storage units and microchip-based flash memory units. The microchip-based flash memory units in solid state drives are usually much more expensive. However, they do operate much, much faster. So the advantages to this technology of having a hybrid storage array is, one, you get to save money while still providing faster storage units. You're essentially building storage units that are part hard drives and part solid state drives. And you're building them into an array where they can interoperate with each other. This saves money because, one, you don't have to buy a storage unit full of solid state drives for the fast speeds. You can have half of them as hard drives, which are much cheaper, and half of them solid state drives, but still provide faster speeds total. And this is kind of the mix in between. It gives you a little bit of best of both worlds. You don't have to spend the pretty penny for all of the solid state drives, but you still get a somewhat faster storage speed. You're not going to get as fast as a full solid state drive array, but you're still going to get faster storage speed. And the second advantage of this technology is that it is an easy incorporation in older storage systems. It's just simple array building and storage dumps for storage servers, things for like storage area networks or network attached storage. They're really easy to incorporate into older storage systems that have only hard drive disks. You can add in a equivalent number of solid state drives to those, and you are now going to have more storage first off for that storage unit, which you're constantly needing to update. But two, you're now going to have faster storage speeds implemented into that older storage system through the solid state drives. And that is it. That is my presentation for Deliverable 3. Thank you very much.